When my daughter's future in-laws told me in front of everyone that I wasn't needed at her rehearsal dinner, I smiled, nodded, and quietly called the venue the next morning to cancel the $18,000 deposit I'd paid myself. Before watching the video, please tell us in the comments from where you are watching this video. The evening began like any other pre-wedding gathering. Soft music, a decorated banquet hall, laughter echoing through the place. I remember standing near the bar, holding a glass of sparkling water, watching my daughter, Emily, move between tables with that nervous excitement brides carry the night before the big day. She looked radiant in a pale blue dress, her hair pulled back just the way her mother used to wear it. I felt proud. After all the years of raising her alone, seeing her happy was worth every hard day. Brad, her fiancé, was shaking hands with guests, trying his best to look like the perfect groom. His parents, Karen and Ronald Collins, hovered nearby, all smiles for the crowd, but cold as ice whenever their eyes met mine. I'd tried to be civil. I really had. From the moment I met them, it was clear they thought they were marrying into something below their standards. Karen once said to Emily, "You'll live better after the wedding," and she didn't mean emotionally. I ignored the small digs for months. I kept my focus on Emily, helping with the planning, paying for most of the expenses, including the venue, an elegant countryside estate that required an $18,000 non-refundable deposit. Emily didn't know the full amount. I didn't want her to feel pressured. I just wanted her day to be perfect. Around 7, the host called everyone to take their seats. The long table was covered in white linen, small candles flickering across it. The room buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and the smell of roasted chicken and garlic bread. I took my seat across from Sophie, my ex-wife, who gave me a polite smile. We'd divorced 10 years earlier, but had stayed on friendly terms for Emily's sake. She leaned toward me and whispered, "You okay?" I nodded. "Just proud," I said quietly. As the toast began, things started to turn. Karen stood up first, her voice loud and deliberate. "We're so thrilled to welcome Emily into our family," she said. "Brad has always been such a wonderful, hard-working man, and now he's found someone who truly completes him." She went on about their values, their traditions, and how the Collins family had always handled weddings with a certain standard. Each line was a thinly veiled reminder that everything, decor, music, catering, had been approved by her. I kept my expression still, but my jaw tightened. When it was Emily's turn to speak, she thanked everyone, her eyes shining. "And I want to especially thank my dad," she said, glancing at me, "for helping make this whole thing possible." The room clapped politely. Karen smiled, that tight, controlled smile she wore when something didn't go her way. After dinner, the coordinator announced a quick walkthrough of the ceremony order. People started moving around. That's when it happened. Karen approached Emily, Brad, and me near the archway where the ceremony rehearsal would take place. She had that commanding tone again. "All right, everyone who's part of the ceremony, gather near the stage," she said. "We'll start with parents of the groom." Emily stepped closer to me, whispering, "You should come too, Dad." But before I could move, Karen raised a hand. "Oh no, no, Michael, you can just watch from the side," she said, smiling faintly. "We don't really need you for this part. The Collins family has it covered." I blinked, thinking I'd misheard. "Excuse me?" I asked calmly. She chuckled softly, looking at Brad for support. "Nothing personal, Michael. It's just that the ceremony order is specific. We don't want to confuse the coordinator. It'll be simpler if you just sit back and let us handle it." Emily's face went pale. "Mom, Dad's walking me down the aisle," she said firmly. Karen laughed, shaking her head. "Sweetheart, that's up for discussion. We thought Ronald would do that part. It just looks more balanced for the photos. Don't you agree, Brad?" Brad froze, eyes darting between us. Maybe we should talk about it later," he mumbled. Karen crossed her arms. "Later. The rehearsal is now." Sophie stepped in then, voice calm but sharp. "Karen, that's not your decision." Karen's tone turned syrupy. "Oh, Sophie, we're just trying to make it smooth. Michael doesn't need to worry about the details." She turned back to me. "You're not needed for this part, really. Just enjoy the evening." That last line hit like a slap. A few guests nearby heard it. The air thickened. Emily looked mortified, whispering, "Mom, please stop." I could see tears forming in her eyes. I wanted to speak, to push back, but something inside me told me to stay quiet. Not out of fear, out of clarity. These people weren't worth a scene. I took a slow breath, placed a hand on Emily's shoulder, and said, "It's okay, honey. Let's just get through tonight. Karen smiled triumphantly and turned away. Sophie gave me a look that said everything. Don't react now. The rehearsal went on awkwardly. I stood in the back, hands in my pockets, watching as Ronald awkwardly walked beside Emily under Karen's direction. My daughter looked uncomfortable the entire time. The other guests pretended not to notice. I stayed silent, just watching, every second carving something cold and steady in my chest. When it ended, I congratulated Brad politely, shook Ronald's hand, and even thanked Karen for hosting. She seemed pleased, thinking she'd put me in my place. But inside, a decision had already formed. I drove home that night in silence, the road empty except for the sound of rain against the windshield. I knew what I was going to do, and by morning, they'd understand exactly how not needed I was. I drove home with the wipers knocking a steady rhythm across glass. My hands stayed light on the wheel, but my mind tracked every word. Karen's voice replayed like a dull commercial that nobody asked to hear. "You're not needed," she had said, smiling for the room. That smile clung to me more than the words themselves. Pride invites noise. Dignity prefers quiet. I reminded myself of that as the exit slid by. Emily deserved calm, and calm would require decisions. The highway looked like a ribbon pressed flat by the rain. Headlights skimmed the puddles and threw quick sparks at the median. On the radio, a talk host argued about tax brackets and inflation. I let it drone while I kept counting the reasons to stay silent. "Don't react now," Sophie had said, and she was right. A public scene only feeds people like Karen. Control was the tool I had left. I would keep it. I thought about the years when money was a thin, stubborn thread. Emily's braces, summer camps, used cars, and college textbooks all came into view. I remembered fixing a leaking roof with a blue tarp and stubborn nails. I remembered Emily's thank you notes, always spelled right, always careful and neat. "Dad, you're my anchor," she wrote once during sophomore year. That sentence pulled me back onto the lane. I wasn't angry, I was focused. Focus has a budget, and mine was paid. At a red light near the river, I checked my phone face down. No new messages, no apologies, no brave words from Brad. The screen reflected my jaw like a hard line drawn with a ruler. I wasn't counting vanity. I was counting respect. Respect isn't purchased with floral centerpieces or craft cocktails. Respect is shown in small choices made when nobody claps. Brad had a choice tonight and chose stillness. Stillness from a groom speaks louder than speeches. I turned onto my street, the one with maples that leaned toward each other. House lights glowed in a steady grid, simple and quiet like good neighbors. My shop truck sat by the curb, still dusty from a drywall job. The familiarity grounded me better than any deep breath exercise ever could. I carried that grounded feeling into the kitchen and set my keys down. I poured water, not whiskey, because I needed clarity. Revenge is loud. Consequences can be precise. Precision thrives sober. The venue contract lay in a folder near the coffee maker. I slid it out and read each clause without hurry or heat. Non-refundable deposit, due dates, service conditions, and cancellation language sat in type. There was nothing tricky, nothing hidden under flowery phrases. I'd paid the deposit in full 2 months earlier, by card from savings. I underlined the line stating, "Client may cancel at any time, deposit forfeited." My name was on the signature line, not Karen's. Authority rides with the hand that signs. I had signed, and I would act accordingly. I called Sophie because she knows my pauses better than most. She answered on the second ring, voice soft but alert like always. "You home?" she asked, skipping any warmed-over small talk. "Yeah," I said, keeping the tone level. I told her I was considering a clean, quiet response. "You sure this helps Emily?" she asked, centering the only question that mattered. "I think it protects her from more disrespect," I said. "Then keep it clean," she replied. Clean makes truth louder. We talked logistics the way normal people discuss grocery lists. She suggested I document the insult in a short factual note. She said to text Emily in the morning with a simple check-in. "Don't make her choose sides tonight," Sophie warned. "Let sleep do small repairs." I agreed and thanked her for staying steady. "Someone has to be the adult," she said, a little smile in her tone. "Try for 6 hours," she added. "Tomorrow we'll ask for more." I walked the hallway and stopped by Emily's childhood photos. There she stood in a soccer uniform, laces knotted into urgent bows. There she smiled with a science fair ribbon, face smudged by marker. There she hugged a dog we fostered for a tired neighbor. Those pictures didn't ask for grand gestures or public scenes. They asked for backbone without shouting. They asked for a father who wouldn't sell dignity for approval. I promised those frames I'd keep the price firm. Before bed, I drafted a note on a yellow legal pad. I wrote the time, the place, the exact phrases spoken by Karen. I wrote who was present and who heard the comment without doubt. I kept it dry, like job notes for a framing inspection. Facts are the scaffolding that keeps anger from tipping. I slid the page beneath the contract and turned off the light. In the dark, the plan felt simple, tight, and fair. I set an alarm and placed the folder on my dresser. Tomorrow I would call the venue at 9, clear and steady. I wanted sleep more than fury, because morning needed a steady hand today. I woke with the plan sitting steady in my chest. The house was quiet except for the humming fridge and a distant garbage truck. I brewed coffee and slid the contract from the folder like a blueprint. The paper smelled faintly of toner and hotel carpet. I read the cancellation clause twice to confirm what I already knew. Non-refundable meant exactly that. The money was gone the moment I paid. Moral accounting felt heavier than the financial math at that moment. Still, choices have a price, and letting that insult stand had one too. I called the venue at 9, right when their office opened. A woman answered with a warm voice and said her name was Paige. I kept my own voice even and friendly, because dignity travels best that way. "Paige, this is Michael Danner," I said, giving the event date. She clicked keys, then confirmed my booking and deposit amount. "How can I help you today?" she asked carefully, like she already sensed weather. "I need to cancel the event," I said, straightforward and calm. A short pause followed, soft with professional surprise, and then her tone steadied again. "Mr. Danner, I want to make sure you've reviewed our policy," she said. "The deposit is non-refundable. I'm required to say that clearly." I told her I'd read it, signed it, and understood the consequences. She asked if there'd been a service issue they could address another way. I thought about Karen's words and kept my answer factual. "No service problem with you," I said. "The issue is respect toward me as the paying client." She listened without jumping in, which I appreciated more than she knew. "Understood," she said finally. "I can process the cancellation today." She asked whether I wanted a written confirmation sent by email. I gave her my address and asked for the account ledger page as well. "You'll receive an itemized record with timestamps," she said, efficient and kind. "Do you want to hold your date while you decide?" I smiled despite myself at her professionalism. "Thank you, but no," I said. "I'm sure." She breathed out, not irritated, just recognizing a final decision. "Then I'll release the ballroom and notify the catering manager now," she replied. Before she ended the call, Paige asked one last careful question. "Do you plan to rebook under a different name or date?" I let silence pass for a beat while I pictured Emily's face. "Not at this time," I answered. "If I do, I'll be the one to call." She accepted that without pressure or sales language. "You'll have confirmation within 15 minutes, she said. "I'm sorry for whatever brought you to this point." Her empathy landed cleanly. It didn't try to fix anything. "Thank you for handling this professionally," I said, and we ended the call. I set the phone down and listened to the quiet settle again. The number 18,000 sat there, heavy but honest. I thought of retirement plans and the new compressor my shop needed. I thought of vacation days I never took, because jobs stack up. The deposit represented more than money. It was years of waking early. Still, the cost of letting someone erase a parent at his own daughter's wedding felt worse. Pride would be cheap if it were only about winning. This was about boundaries a family should not cross, even in expensive rooms. I texted Sophie and asked if she could talk for 5 minutes. She called back almost instantly, voice sharper with purpose than last night. "Did you do it?" she asked. No judgment, just focus. "Cancelled and documented," I said. "They'll send written confirmation today." She exhaled through her nose, a small sound that carried relief. "You're going to tell Emily before anyone else does," she said. "Yes," I answered, already planning. The words. Facts first, then the reason in plain language. "Keep it about dignity, not punishment," she added. "She'll hear you better that way." I drafted the message, but didn't hit send yet. I wanted to call her, to let her voice steer through the shock. I pictured Karen calling the venue later and hearing the news. I pictured Brad's confused expression turning into excuses about timing and logistics. None of that mattered compared to Emily's first minute with the truth. I set the phone aside and rehearsed the short version out loud. Stick to details, avoid blame adjectives, answer questions, offer alternatives. A father's job isn't comfort at any price, it's truth with a steady hand. The email arrived from Paige exactly 13 minutes later. It included the cancellation form, the ledger, and a scanned memo. The memo recorded our phone call time and my reason in one neutral sentence. I printed the first page and slid it behind the contract. Paper trails or fences, they keep wandering stories from trampling facts. I took a photo of the page and saved it in a labeled folder. That small click felt like turning a key in a quiet lock. The practical steps grounded the emotion that kept trying to spill. The phone buzzed. Sophie again, quick and businesslike. "One more thought," she said. "Expect Karen to claim you acted out of spite." I nodded to the empty room and kept my voice measured. "I acted within my contract rights and for clear reasons," I replied. "If she wants the venue, she's free to pay and rebook." Sophie hummed agreement and added, "Offer to fund a simpler ceremony for Emily." That line fit my values without rewarding bad behavior. "Good," I said. "Backyard, courthouse, small chapel, whatever Emily wants." The plan felt less like revenge now, and more like a line drawn straight. I called Emily and heard the tired edge in her hello. I asked if she had a minute somewhere private, and she did. "I need to tell you something factual," I began, slow and even. "I paid the venue deposit. This morning I canceled the contract. The deposit is forfeited. I did it because last night your future in-laws told me I wasn't needed." The silence on her end stretched, then broke into a soft, shocked breath. "Dad, you paid the whole deposit?" she whispered. "Yes," I said, "and I won't let people erase a parent who showed up." She didn't speak for several seconds, and I let the quiet hold. "Are you mad at me?" she asked, voice small but steady. "No," I said. "I'm protecting boundaries you shouldn't have to defend." She sniffed and gathered herself like a teacher before a tough class. "What do we do now?" she asked, moving to solutions. "We plan what you want, not what looks balanced in someone's photos," I answered. "If you want a courthouse, I'll be there. If you want the backyard, I'll mow the whole block." She let out a tiny laugh that sounded like the first warm day in March. "Let me think," she said, "and I need to talk to Brad today." "Ask him for a clear position," I suggested. "Not later. Not vague." She agreed and promised to call tonight after school. "Thank you for being calm," she said, the words simple and strong. "That's the goal," I replied, meaning it fully. We ended the call, and I stood still until the air felt level again. The deposit was gone, but something steadier had taken its place. Sophie arrived just after lunch with a paper bag and her practical calm. She set a deli sandwich on my counter and pointed me to a chair. "Eat first," she said, not asking. I took a bite and felt my shoulders unclench an inch. She poured iced tea like we were planning a school fundraiser. "Okay," she said. "Let's talk strategy, not feelings." I nodded because feelings were a storm, and strategy was road paint. "What's our purpose?" she asked, holding my eyes. "Protect Emily's dignity and make clear boundaries," I answered. "Good," she said. "Then every step must serve that purpose." She took out a small notebook and wrote short headings like a coach. "Audience," she said, tapping the page. "Emily first, then Brad, then his parents, then vendors." I agreed and added the efficient to the list. "Communication," she continued. "We use short, factual statements and repeat them kindly." She drew a small box and wrote the key line. "Michael will walk Emily down the aisle, or Michael will not attend." I flinched at the last clause. She saw it and softened her voice. "It's a boundary, not a threat," she said. "Boundaries work best, stated once and held." We went over last night in precise detail, just like she prefers. I recited Karen's exact words and where people stood near the arch. Sophie asked who else heard it without doubt, and I named 3. "Good," she said. "Witnesses reduce gaslighting." She underlined that and circled the contract photo on my phone. "Paper beats volume," she said, not smiling. "We covered the money only long enough to name it fairly. You chose to spend it," she said. "You choose how to react when disrespected. That is adult math." I breathed out and felt the sting fade into structure. "Next is Emily," she said, moving us forward. "You already told her the facts, which matters." I nodded and told her Emily planned to talk with Brad today. "Ask her to request his position in one sentence." Sophie said, "No waffles, no later, no maybe." She wrote the sentence for me to send. "Who walks me down the aisle, Brad?" She looked up and added, "If he can't answer directly, that is also an answer." I didn't want that to be true, but it landed clean. Keep reminding her she has choices, Sophie said. Courthouse, backyard, chapel, dignity in each option. We crafted a short message for Brad if he called me first. Brad, I would say, I canceled the venue because I was told I wasn't needed. If you want to replace the venue, you may pay for it. My boundary stands. Sophie had me practice until the words lost heat. I pushed back once, saying it sounded cold. She shook her head and touched my wrist. It's clear, not cold, she said. You are not insulting him. You're refusing to be erased. She paused and added, leave the door open for maturity. Don't slam it for drama. We touched the legal side, but kept it brief by design. If they claim damages, she said, you signed, you canceled, and the deposit was yours. She suggested I keep all communication in writing after today. Phone calls invite spin. Emails leave footprints, she said. I asked about the photographer and caterer, both on separate contracts. Inform them that the event is on hold pending family decisions, she advised. No explanations, just status. She reminded me to forward the venue confirmation to Emily. Not to pressure her, she said, but to anchor the story in documents. Sophie studied me for a long second and then softened the edges. You know, you've always been good at the long plan, she said. I remembered late tuition bills and odd jobs and steady mornings. You didn't cancel out of rage, she added. You canceled to stop a pattern before it could scar your daughter. I nodded, feeling both seen and steadied. If Brad calls you vindictive, translate it in your head, she said. He means you inserted consequences. Consequences are not cruelty, they're education. I let that settle like gravel poured into a firm trench. By mid-afternoon, Sophie suggested we prepare one statement for Karen. It would be short and final, to be sent only if needed. We wrote, Karen, after your statement that I was not needed, I canceled the venue deposit I personally paid. If you wish to host a new event, you are free to book and pay. Further discussion should go through Emily and Brad. I blinked at the clarity and thanked Sophie for cutting every extra word. Leave emotion out, she said. Emotion is what they'll try to debate. Facts leave less oxygen for drama. I copied it into drafts and closed my phone. We sat quietly for a minute and listened to the neighbor's mower hum. How's your heart? She asked, finally letting feelings have a minute. Steady, I said, surprised that it was true. Sad for Emily, worried she'll carry guilt. Sophie sighed the way good mothers sigh. Guilt is a reflex in kind daughters, she said. Direct it toward responsibility, not blame. She suggested I tell Emily one more thing tonight. Say, I chose this so you wouldn't have to fight alone, Sophie advised. Kids need to know the reason is love, not revenge. I wrote it down because it was the whole point. As she stood to leave, Sophie touched the photo on my fridge of Emily at 8, mud on her knees, ribbon in her hair, grin without apology. She is still this kid inside, Sophie said. Protect the kid while asking the adult to speak clearly. We walked to the door and she squeezed my shoulder. You did the hard part, she said. Now, do the patient part. On the porch, the light shifted and the air felt cleaner. After she left, I gathered the drafts, the contract, and the memo into one folder. I set it on the table and felt the plan breathe on its own. Brad called first, early evening, voice tight like a necktie pulled wrong. He skipped greetings and asked if I had canceled the venue. I confirmed, using the same clean words I had practiced with Sophie. He said he wished I'd talked to him before doing something so drastic. I reminded him he had stayed silent when his mother told me I wasn't needed. He claimed it was a misunderstanding, just poor phrasing during a busy night. I asked him to answer a single question with a single sentence. Who walks Emily down the aisle? I said, leaving no room for fog. He hesitated, and the quiet worked longer than any speech. Of course you should, he finally said, but the sentence sounded rented. I asked if that answer would be the same in front of his parents. He said yes again, stronger this time, as if he'd heard his own uncertainty. I told him that answer could reopen options, but only after honesty was consistent. He asked if I'd reverse the cancellation while he cleared the air. I declined and explained the deposit was mine and already forfeited. He said he could try to cover a new venue if needed. I told him the decision to pay would be his to make, not mine to manage. He exhaled, then asked if he could bring Emily by tonight. I said Emily should decide that, not him, and the line went quiet again. He said he understood, would call her now. Before we hung up, I told him something simple and final. Respect is the budget, I said. If it balances, other costs are easier. He said he got it, though I couldn't tell if he truly did. I ended the call and set the phone face down on the table. The house felt steady, like a level beam set right. I poured water and waited without pacing or plans to escalate. Waiting can be a tool when you've already acted cleanly. The second call arrived 10 minutes later, Karen's number flashing across the screen. I answered because avoidance invites rumors. She began with a slow, practiced dignity I recognized from toasts and fundraisers. She said she was so sorry for any confusion and wanted to align on expectations. I kept my voice even and asked her to state what confused her. She said she never meant I wasn't needed, only that the rehearsal flow required fewer bodies. I repeated her sentence from last night, word for word, including the part about Ronald walking Emily. She accused me of twisting context. I replied with the names of 3 witnesses. That ended the spin. Karen shifted to logistics, saying the family needed the venue restored immediately. I told her the contract was mine and the deposit was forfeited. She said that was reckless, given the invitations and vendor schedules. I said it was measured, given her public effort to erase a parent. She insisted Ronald had been selected for balance in photos and family tradition. I said Emily would decide who walked with her, or I would not attend. She accused me of emotional blackmail. I defined it as boundary maintenance. She demanded I meet them tonight to fix it. I said fixes follow apologies, not demands. Her tone sharpened, scraping past hospitality into threat. She said there would be consequences if I embarrassed their family like this. I asked what consequences she envisioned because vague words hide weak plans. She said guests would assume I ran out of money. I laughed once, not cruelly, just honestly, and told her I was fine being misjudged by people who valued chairs over character. She repeated the word non-refundable like a verdict, and I agreed with the fact. Then I told her something that seemed to stun her more than the cancellation itself. You are free to book and pay for any venue you prefer, I said. The phone stayed silent long enough to count 7 heartbeats. She said that was impossible on short notice, and I believed her. I told her weddings scale down easier than pride does. She asked whether I realized how this would make Brad look to his colleagues. I said Brad could repair plenty with a single firm sentence. She demanded to know if Emily had put me up to this. I said Emily had known nothing until after I acted. She tried a softer approach, asking if I cared about Emily's happiness. I said I cared enough to stop a pattern that would rewrite her marriage on day 1. She sighed, then said she would loop her husband in and call back. Ronald's call came 20 minutes later, the voice of a man who lives in the middle lane. He started with weather talk and then asked what it would take to make this right. I gave him the short list Sophie and I built, without extra edges. Public apology to Emily and me for the rehearsal insult. Clear agreement that I would walk my daughter down the aisle. A written acknowledgement that future decisions would be made by the couple, not their parents. He asked if the apology needed to be public. I said yes, because the insult had been public. He sighed, then said he would try to persuade Karen. Tries often die before leaving the mouth that promised them. While I waited, I texted Emily to check on her. She said Brad had called and finally told her I should walk her down the aisle. She said he sounded scared of conflict, but more direct than usual. I told her I had asked him that exact question and heard the same answer. She asked if we could host a smaller ceremony if the Collins plan collapsed. I said yes, and described 3 options that wouldn't strain anyone. She asked me to hold off on further calls until she met Brad tonight. I agreed and told her I'd be here if she needed me. She sent a heart and a tiny, weary smile. Karen called back just before sunset, the hour when stubborn light softens. She said they would proceed only if the event returned to the original venue. I told her the venue was gone and that my conditions stood. She offered to reimburse my deposit if I reversed the cancellation today. I said that was not possible and not the point. She tried to trade money for control. I refused the trade. She said I was making this about ego, and I said I was making it about respect. She warned that family would remember this for years. I said good, because memory can deter future disrespect. When the calls finally ended, the room felt bigger. I stacked the contract, the confirmation, and my notes in one neat pile. I wrote the 3 conditions again in block letters and slid the page on top. Then I turned off the kitchen light and stood at the window. The maples along my street leaned toward each other like neighbors sharing shade. My phone stayed face down by choice, not fear. The calls had done what they needed to do. I had spoken once, cleanly, and held the line. Now the next move belonged to the people who created the problem. The venue manager called mid-morning, voice steady but edged by urgency. She introduced herself as Paige's director and said she was confirming the release date. I thanked her for the follow-up and asked if any messages had come from the Collins family. She said 3 voicemails arrived overnight asking to reverse the mistake. I told her there was no mistake and the deposit was mine to forfeit. Understood, she said, keeping it professional and direct. If they call again, we'll refer them to you, she added. Please don't, I replied. You can note that the client declined contact. She paused, then said, we'll document that instruction today. Her tone told me this was not their first family storm. By noon, texts began stacking like pallets. Cousins asking what happened, a neighbor offering extra chairs, one aunt forwarding a rumor. Karen had apparently told relatives the venue double booked and forced a reset. I answered nobody with heat, only with one clean line. The venue is canceled by me. Future details will come from Emily. A cousin called anyway and asked if I'd lost my temper. No, I said. I used a boundary the contract allowed. He breathed out and said he respected that, then offered his yard if need. Appreciated, I replied, keeping favors in a quiet ledger. The goal stayed simple. Protect Emily and keep the narrative clean. Brad texted that he wanted to meet at a coffee shop near Emily's school. I agreed, but only after asking if Emily wanted me there. She said yes and gave a time that fit between her classes. When we arrived, Brad looked like he'd slept in a suit he couldn't afford. I told my mom you're walking Emily, he said, hands tight around a paper cup. She didn't take it well. I nodded and asked if he had repeated it in front of Ronald. I did, he said, eyes steady for once. And I told them we decide, not them. Emily watched him like a teacher waiting for a late assignment. Good, she said. Keep saying it the same way. While we talked, Karen called Brad twice, and he silenced the phone. She wants the original venue back, he said, choosing his words like stepping stones. I told him that chapter was closed and he should plan within reality. Can we salvage the vendors? He asked, worried about deposits and schedules. Most vendors are flexible with date shifts, I said, but choose scale that fits the time. Emily outlined a simple plan that sounded like relief in sentences. Courthouse this week, she said, then a small backyard reception next month. Brad stared at his cup, then nodded with something like gratitude. I'll pay for tents and food, he said. That's mine to handle. The Collins group chat leaked feelings into the afternoon. Ronald texted me privately, asking if a private apology could replace a public one. No, I replied. The insult was public. The repair should match. He sent 3 dots and then nothing, a modern way to shrug. Karen sent Emily a long message about family optics and what guests expect. Emily typed for a minute, then showed me her reply before sending. Mom, I love you, but decisions are ours, she wrote. Dad will walk me and we're changing the plan. She hit send and set the phone face down with a small, firm breath. Strength can be quiet, and today it was. By late afternoon, Paige emailed that the ballroom had already been rebooked for a fall gala. The finality helped. There was nothing left to claw back. A few guests panicked in a small way and asked for hotel guidance. I sent a short note to my side of the list with facts only. Ceremony plan changing. Please hold travel updates until Saturday, it read. Brad offered to message his side, but I told him to coordinate through Emily first. One voice, I said. Confusion favors drama. He agreed and drafted a simple note that Emily edited for tone. They sent it together, side by side at the table, like a good rehearsal finally done right. Karen tried a last lever at dinner time, calling Sophie to triangulate. Sophie put her on speaker and kept the room level. Michael, are you there? Karen asked, pretending the call was a joint effort. I am, I said, and Emily is leading decisions now. Karen said the deposit move humiliated them and would scar the families. Sophie cut in before heat rose. A public boundary corrected a public insult, she said. You may apologize at the next family gathering and move forward. Karen countered that their friends would never understand this downgrade. Then host them another day, Sophie said, steady as a courthouse clerk. Brad stopped by after dinner with 2 options priced out on a notepad. The first was a modest park shelter with a nearby chapel. The second was our backyard with rented tents and simple catering. Emily ran her finger along the second option and smiled like a decision had landed. Backyard, she said. Music low, food good, no speeches unless invited. Brad nodded, relieved to carry tasks he could measure. I'll handle permits, trash pickup, and parking, he said. I'll send you receipts. I'm not asking for reimbursements. I looked at him and said the thing that mattered. If you keep this energy, we'll be fine. A final call came from Ronald after sunset, the hour for practical men. He said he would attend whatever ceremony Emily chose and wanted to avoid more noise. I'll apologize to you both, he added, voice low and honest. It won't be a performance. I thanked him for the directness and told him that was enough from him. He asked how to handle Karen if she started again. Answer once, then stop, I said. Silence after clarity is a boundary too. He sighed, but agreed to try, and I believed him just enough. Small progress often arrives through the quieter parent. That night, I walked the yard with a tape measure and a calm mind. The grass needed a cut, but the space felt right for 100 simple joys. I mapped tent lines in my head and pictured lights strung from maple to maple. Emily joined me barefoot, holding a mug of tea and a tired smile. This feels like us, she said, looking at the open space. It does, I answered, seeing third-grade soccer parties layered over the lawn. We'll keep it honest, keep it kind, and keep it ours. She nodded, then said something I will keep longer than any receipt. Thank you for making the hard part simple. Emily's realization didn't arrive like thunder. It came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. She left school early, walked to our house, and sat at the kitchen table. Her eyes were clear, not red from crying, which told me she was ready. I read the messages again, she said, steady as a clock. She pulled printed screenshots from a folder and organized them by time. The pattern isn't new, she continued, flipping through the pages. It's just louder now. I waited because rushing her would turn clarity into steam. I need to say what I've learned, she said, tapping the stack. Brad wants a peaceful life, she began, looking at me without flinching, but he confuses peace with silence. She slid the first print toward me, the rehearsal blast in black letters. When his mom pushes, he freezes, she said. When she frames it as tradition, he agrees. She placed a second sheet with Ronald's careful message. He respects order, but avoids conflict, she said. That helps Karen win. She inhaled once and kept steady. This weekend showed me my part, she added. I kept smoothing edges because I hate mess. Her voice didn't crack, it just landed. She asked me to listen while she practiced a conversation. I agreed, and she took a breath like a swimmer at the edge. Brad, she said to the air, do you choose our marriage or your mother's approval? She paused, then added a second line. Do you accept that I will not be managed? She practiced a third line and watched my face. If you choose us, you say it in front of her, she said. If you can't, I won't drag you. I nodded once and told her the sentences were clean. Clean sentences leave fewer places to hide. We drove to Brad's apartment after dinner, the kind of place with new floors and thin walls. He opened the door quickly and looked relieved to see Emily. Thank you for coming, he said, shaking my hand like a promise. We sat at the small table by the window, a city humming outside. Emily started without softening because softening had cost too much. I'm not mad, she said. I'm measuring. Brad shifted, then nodded for her to continue. She laid out her 2 questions exactly as rehearsed. He closed his eyes for a beat, then opened them and held her look. I choose us, he said, voice small but honest. Emily waited because words are cheap without context. I'll say it to my parents tonight, he added, gathering the edges. You will walk with your father. She didn't thank him because this wasn't a gift. It was baseline. We need more than a single moment, she said. We need a rule. She wrote it on a notepad and pushed it toward him. Decisions about us are made by us, it read. He read it twice, then signed his initials like a quiet contract. I agree, he said. Not bravado, just plain. Karen called within 15 minutes as if she smelled change through drywall. Brad put her on speaker because sunlight works on mold. We're restoring the original plan, she announced, skipping courtesy. No, Brad said, and the words stood taller than he did. Emily and I decide, he continued, voice gaining bones. Michael will walk her down the aisle. Karen tried to anchor him with history and photos. He repeated the line again, unchanged and unnegotiated. She said guests would be confused. He said guests could handle simple sentences. She tried to pivot to money, but the pivot stalled. Ronald joined, his tone careful like stepping around glass. Son, maybe we can find a middle lane, he offered. There isn't one here, Brad replied, not angry, just done. Emily added one more clear point because clarity is mercy. We're moving to a smaller ceremony, she said. Your attendance is welcome, not required. Karen gasped like oxygen had been taxed. You cannot downgrade our family event, she snapped. We can scale our wedding, Emily said, firm and even. We can also scale your access if you keep insulting people. Ronald whispered her name, a soft plea without teeth. Karen pushed for leverage and asked if the deposit could be replaced. Not the point, Brad said, refusing the bait. Mom, apologize, he continued, surprising himself. You insulted a parent who showed up. The line went quiet long enough to hear traffic outside the window. Karen finally said she was sorry for any confusion, which wasn't an apology. Emily didn't accept the non-apology and kept her spine straight. Say the thing, she said. Name it. Karen swallowed and forced the real words out. Michael, I'm sorry for saying you weren't needed, she said, strained but accurate. That was wrong. Silence settled. Not warm, but workable. Emily nodded once, which was the only reward on offer. Thank you, I said, because manners live even in storms. Brad looked at me like he had climbed a small hill and seen a view. We'll do the courthouse Friday, he said. Backyard next month. Karen opened her mouth to argue, but Ronald spoke first. We'll be there, he said, choosing peace over appearances. Karen muttered something about friends and expectations. Emily ended the call with one final measured line. We're building a marriage, not a pageant, she said, and hung up cleanly. Back in my truck, Emily exhaled like air finally fit in her ribcage. I thought I needed their approval, she said, voice low but bright. Turns out I needed my own. She leaned her head against the window and watched the city slide. Dad, you drew the line, she added. I just learned to stand on it. I told her she had done the heavy lifting. Lines are nothing without someone brave enough to stand still. I can stand now, she said, smiling into the dark glass. We drove home without music, just tires and a shared simple relief. The courthouse smelled faintly of floor polish and coffee, not roses and champagne. We walked through a metal detector instead of a floral arch. Emily held my arm, calm and sure, not performing for a camera. Brad walked beside us, jacket neat and voice quiet. The clerk checked IDs and handed us a small numbered ticket. Judge Merrick is running on time, she said, kindly and efficient. Karen and Ronald arrived with faces arranged into polite neutrality. Sophie stood behind me, steady as a handrail when stairs feel slick. I breathed once and let the simpler plan do its work. When our number flashed, we stepped into a bright, no-frills courtroom. Judge Merrick smiled with the warmth of a school principal on graduation day. Short and clear, he said, the best kind of ceremony. He led them through vows that used plain English, not gilded promises. Emily's voice stayed strong on every word, eyes steady and present. Brad looked at her like a man finally choosing one door. I walked my daughter, 3 careful steps, exactly as we agreed. The judge nodded at me with a small respect that reached my bones. The rings went on without a tremble, and the room held. After the signature, the judge offered one sentence of practical wisdom. Love is large, he said, but schedules and boundaries keep it alive. Emily laughed softly, and Brad squeezed her hand like a promise. We stepped into the hallway where the light felt kinder. Ronald shook my hand and kept his voice low. I'm sorry for my part, he said, not asking for absolution. Thank you, I answered, because clean apologies deserve clean reception. Karen approached with a face that looked stitched from 3 different feelings. She spoke carefully, choosing each word like it might break. Michael, I'm sorry I said you weren't needed, she managed, finally honest. I nodded once and let the apology land without lecture. Emily hugged her mother and ended the moment before it frayed. Brad exhaled, tired and lighter, and suggested lunch at the diner. We walked 2 blocks to a room full of pie glass and chrome. The waitress recognized newlyweds and brought coffee before we asked. Sophie clinked a spoon against her water and kept it brief. To decisions made by the people who live with them, she said. We ate turkey sandwiches and laughed about nothing important, which felt right. The next morning was the day the ballroom would have shimmered. Instead, sunlight hit our kitchen table and found no panic there. Guests texted questions that Emily answered with one sentence. Courthouse yesterday, backyard celebration next month, she wrote, consistent and kind. Karen's friends reacted with theatrical concern and whispers about standards. Ronald shut down rumors by repeating facts without frosting. Venue was canceled by the payer after a public insult, he said. The fall gala had claimed the hall, so there was nowhere to claw. The quiet truth held stronger than any spin offered in panic. A few Collins relatives showed up at the locked ballroom anyway. They took photos of a poster for the fall gala through the glass. One aunt posted a caption about mix-ups, then deleted it 10 minutes later. Brad replied to 2 cousins with a simple correction and a plan. "We married Friday," he wrote. "Backyard reception next month. Details soon." Emily refused to argue in group threads that loved drama. She made one post with a photo on the courthouse steps. "We're married," the caption read, "simple and right for us." The comments filled with hearts instead of advice, which felt like a win. That afternoon, we visited the Collins house because grown-ups finish loops. Karen opened the door wearing a careful smile and softer posture. The living room held a few neighbors whose faces carried eager questions. Ronald cleared his throat before stories could grow legs. "I owe a public apology," he said, looking at Emily, "and we were wrong at the rehearsal. Respect should have led." He kept it short, which made it stronger. Karen spoke next and didn't reach for excuses this time. "I cared about optics more than people," she said, steady enough. Brad added one important sentence while the air still held shape. "From here on, decisions about us are made by us," he said. He looked at his parents in a way that asked for adulthood, not approval. Ronald nodded and sat back like a weight had finally been set down. Karen swallowed and agreed, though her eyes needed practice for this skill. Emily thanked them and declined any replanning of ceremonies. "We're keeping the backyard," she said, smiling without apology. A neighbor offered folding chairs and a cooler, which made me laugh. This was the scale we needed, not a ballroom full of pressure. At home, I walked the yard with a tape measure and calm mind. Brad joined me and asked about tent placement like a man learning. "Keep the dance area on the flattest patch," I said, pointing north. He wrote it down because learning needs small notes, not speeches. Emily came outside with lemonade and a grin that felt earned. "We'll do lights from maple to maple," she said, eyes bright. Sophie suggested a short playlist and no open mic. "Invited words only," she said, saving us future rescues. We stood there seeing it, and it looked like a life, not a show. Around sunset, a few neighbors wandered over with practical kindness. One had extension cords, another offered a grill for extra burgers. A teenager asked if we wanted help stringing lights next month. I thanked him and handed over a coil like passing a baton. Emily slipped her arm through mine and watched the sky turn honey. "The wedding that wasn't saved, the marriage that could be," she said. I didn't add wisdom because the line already held. We stood in the yard that raised her and the ground felt level. I woke early the next day and walked the yard before the street stirred. Dew gathered along the fence like a quiet border that asked for care. I checked the maple branches and pictured where lights would hang cleanly. My shop notebook came out with lines for tents, tables, and trash. I wrote tasks in short words that kept the mind steady. Mow, edge, rent, confirm, and stack sat like bricks. Sophie texted to ask about plates, and I told her simple white works best. Brad offered to pick up permits, parking signs, and extra bins. Emily sent a heart and a reminder to keep the playlist short. By 9, my crew called from a remodel site to check schedules. I told them I needed 2 evenings next week for family infrastructure. They laughed and said it sounded like a kitchen island with opinions. I asked one guy if he could weld a small arch that anchors without damage. He said he could do it for material cost and a slice of cake. I accepted and promised him a plate with a corner piece of frosting. Contracts teach clarity, but neighbors teach grace with tools. I thought about the deposit and decided not to chase meaning past its use. Money had done its job by drawing a line nothing else could draw. Emily arrived mid-morning carrying a clipboard she borrowed from school. She set it on the table and smiled like a coach before practice. "I want guest flow to feel easy," she said, tapping the page. We mapped 2 drink stations to avoid single-file lines and size. She proposed a short welcome, a first dance, and then open visiting. "No bouquet toss and no shoe game," she added, grinning at me. I thanked her for saving me from odd rituals that pretend to be fun. Brad walked in with permits and a parking plan marked with arrows. "Clean," I said, approving a plan that respected driveways and walkers. After lunch, Brad asked if we could talk on the porch alone. He held a folded note like a young man bringing a resume. "I'm sorry I stayed quiet too long," he said, voice steady but honest. I thought keeping peace meant keeping still, and that was cowardly. I let him finish without saving him from his own sentence. He said he had scheduled counseling to learn conflict without panic. Emily deserves a partner, not a referee, he added, meeting my eyes. I told him he was not applying for my approval, but for his future. Keep doing the next right thing, then the next, I said. He nodded like a man who finally found the staircase. Ronald stopped by with folding tables and a small cooler of ice. He looked lighter, like a man who finally set down a heavy bag. I spoke to Karen again, he said. Careful but clear. I told her we attend as parents, not directors. I thanked him for using plain language that does not fray under heat. He said he would apologize again in front of a few relatives this weekend. Not for performance, he added, for clarity. I believed him because his sentences no longer dodged corners. When he left, he squeezed my shoulder once, like two men who finally understood rank. Karen texted Emily that afternoon, asking to help with flowers. Emily showed me the message and asked how to answer kindly. Let her bring cut flowers in jars, I suggested. No complex centerpieces. Emily typed that and added one clean boundary about timing and drop-off. Karen responded with a thumbs up and nothing extra, which felt like progress. I expected backsliding because change rarely walks in a straight line. Still, the tone had shifted from command to offer. My job was to hold space for better behavior while guarding the fence. You can forgive a path while keeping the gate latched. I spent an hour on the finances because numbers deserve daylight. I listed the deposit, the smaller vendor totals, and the new costs. The math showed loss but not failure, only a redirected plan. I decided to cover the rentals and let Brad handle food and permits. Sophie volunteered desserts and pickup, which cut a tidy corner off stress. Emily insisted on buying her own simple dress for the backyard day. Let me invest in my own joy, she said, smiling without apology. Hearing that line told me the math had already paid off in wisdom. That evening, Emily and I walked the neighborhood and said thanks. The teenager who offered to string lights asked about timing and safety. I told him we would test outlets, tape cords, and keep a clear path. A neighbor across the street promised to block his driveway for easy turnarounds. Another offered a speaker stand and a spare extension reel. Community is not a banner. It is a stack of small, quiet loans. Emily looked at me with that grade school grin she never fully lost. This is what a good wedding should feel like, she said. People showing up because they want to, not because they have to. When the sun slipped behind roofs, I sat on the steps and breathed. The week had turned from spectacle to substance without fireworks. I thought about the courthouse, the judge's line, and my daughter's steady eyes. I thought about a ballroom that belonged to someone else by nightfall. Respect cannot be rented like chairs. It must be earned in sentences. My part had been simple, even if the cost hurt. I canceled a room and opened a yard, and in that trade we found truth. Some losses buy a map that no fancy invitation can provide. A year later, the maples held a quiet ceiling over our yard. The lights we bought still worked, despite a winter that tested wiring. I checked each bulb and felt time settle into something friendly. Emily and Brad arrived early, carrying a casserole and a calmer energy. Their marriage looked ordinary in a way that matters most. They argued sometimes, but they argued fairly and returned to center. Counseling had given them words that kept panic from leading. Emily used them like tools, not decorations for social media. Brad kept his shoulders lower and his sentences clearer. I could see the practice in every small decision. We hosted an anniversary barbecue because simple gatherings fit us best. Neighbors rolled coolers across sidewalks like ships docking without fuss. Sophie set desserts along a folding table with the usual precision. Ronald brought ice, chairs, and a smile that came easier now. Karen carried flowers in jars, just as Emily asked last year. She placed them where directed and did not reach for the schedule. Her conversations carried fewer edges and more questions than before. She asked about school, permits, and the arch without steering anything. Progress never arrives perfect, but it showed up on time today. We all gave it room to breathe. Brad flipped burgers while I handled the grill's stubborn hotspots. He worked steadily and kept checking for empty plates without prompting. Heat moves faster on the left, I told him, pointing with tongs. Got it, he said. I'll rotate and keep the tops covered. Emily passed lemonade and gathered plates, keeping flow smooth without, announcing it. Their rhythm looked like partnership, not performance or a photo opportunity. I stood back and let the scene hold its own weight. Sophie leaned close and said the line we both felt. Calm is underrated, but it holds families together. We clinked cups and watched people relax. Near sunset, Ronald asked to say a few words. Nothing long. He cleared his throat and looked at Emily, then at me, steady. I learned respect late, but I learned it for real, he said. Thank you for insisting on boundaries when we were careless. He turned toward Karen and gave her room without forcing her hand. She nodded and chose a humble sentence that actually fit. I am sorry again for that night, she said simply. I'm learning to love people more than plans. The yard stayed quiet, kind, and free of applause. Sometimes dignity sounds like a door closing gently. After the food, the teenager who strung lights last year played guitar. He had grown taller, but his chords still landed soft and clean. Kids chased bubbles across the grass while parents compared school supply lists. Someone asked about the courthouse photo that Emily framed inside. She told the story without drama, just dates, decisions, and simple vows. Brad added a line about choosing the same person daily, not yearly. The group nodded the way honest groups do when truth lands. A friend asked if the deposit still bothered me a year later. It bought clarity, I said, and clarity has paid dividends all year. The answer felt final and fair. Business stayed steady through the seasons, and I finally took days off. The crew teased me for admitting that Saturdays could belong at home. We built a small patio where folding chairs don't wobble anymore. I kept the arch in the shed, ready for loan without question. It went out 3 times this spring to neighbors with quick plans. Every return came with a handwritten note, and sometimes a slice of cake. People learned our yard welcomes celebrations that trade cost for connection. That felt like the right kind of wealth to store. Respect had turned into a neighborhood habit, sturdy and repeatable. I slept better with that ledger balanced. Emily and Brad had a rule posted on their fridge in marker. Decisions about us are made by us, it read, clean and centered. She told me it saved them arguments and hours of frustrated guessing. Brad added a second line about calling timeouts before voices rise. They both laughed, describing clumsy early attempts at those pauses. Practice became easier, and their quiet confidence grew sturdier. Karen respected the rule more often than not, which counted. Ronald kept modeling it until it stuck in the house. I saw a future with fewer rescues and more self-corrections. That is how families grow up together. As the evening thinned, I walked the fence line with my usual habit. The lights hummed softly, while the maples filtered the last warm glow. Emily slipped beside me and hooked her arm through mine. You did the hard thing first, she said, voice warm and steady. It gave us the map when storms tried to erase roads. I told her the map belongs to them now, not to me. We'll keep it updated, she said, smiling at the ground's even look. Brad joined and handed me a plate wrapped with careful foil. For tomorrow, he said, because good days deserve leftovers. I nodded, full of a simple, durable peace. If you enjoyed this story and learned something from it, give it a thumbs up, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more powerful life lessons.